Do humans own the earth? In other words, did God give it to us? Well, the only place in the Bible where it's really explicit is in Psalm 115. It says, "The heavens are the Lord's heavens, but the earth he has given to human beings." So this is a version of God being transcendent, being, way up there. Kind of like when Jesus prays, "Our Father who art in heaven." But then humans are the ones who are kind of like the managers in the meantime. He's given us the earth. But the Bible being what it is, an inspired book that helps us with our understand the world and understand God and try to live better. Well, there are more times when we get passages and verses in the Bible that talk about the fact that we don't own anything. God is still the owner. Here are some examples. In Psalm 24, the most explicit one, "The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it." It belongs to the Lord. It's the Lord's. In Deuteronomy, "Heaven and the heaven of heavens belong to the Lord your God, the earth with all that is in it." So again, we're not the owners. It all belongs to God. In Leviticus, these are laws relating to the fact that the Hebrews, the ex-slaves from Egypt, arrive in this land, and then they now have a bunch of laws directly from God. "The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. With me you are but aliens and tenants." Oh, wow. So God leads them to the promised land, but Canaanites already live there, and so that's kind of already a problem. And as they live there, well, they're reminded in this law that they are aliens and tenants, they're immigrants. And although it's their promised land, there's also some humility to the way they should act. And when you're an immigrant or a tenant specifically, you're not an owner, there are some limits you should respect. Let's talk about the promised land. Now, the promised land is described as this very bountiful place. We seem to get the impression it's very green, has lots of resources. This is what God tells Moses: "I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey." Now, when I was a child and I heard that expression, "a land flowing with milk and honey," what do you think was in my mind? I was imagining streams of milk, literally. And I was imagining trees dripping with honey. Kind of a strange mental picture. So by doing just a little bit of research, I discovered that, well, goats were the ones giving milk, which wasn't flowing in rivers. And the honey was obviously coming from bees, but in these natural cavities in rock. And okay, so if I first talk about milk, how is milk produced? Well, it's produced by a mother goat that needs to be in good conditions to reproduce. If it's totally dry and nothing grows there, you won't see a population of goats, even wild goats I'm talking about. So there needs to be rain, precipitation. There needs to be land that is able to produce in with a good balance already there. So then when there's lots of grass growing everywhere, the goats can go eat those, eat a bunch of leaves from the trees as well, and then produce milk. If there's an abundance of grass, well then the goats can just munch on that, and when they eat the good grass and they see further off that the grass is even higher, they'll go in that section and always eat something that's better. And then the initial place where they were can renew itself. And that means that they have enough food so they can reproduce. And the mothers give birth, and then they produce lots of milk. And then they can produce more young because there's just so many natural resources there. Lots of grass. And so that's where the expression of the milk flowing comes from, because the land is green. There's lots of grass, lots of vegetation. And where does the idea of flowing honey come from? Well, if there are lots of flowers, which means that the soil is damp enough to have flowers, well then the bees can go pollinate and then come back, and then you can have lots and lots and lots of bees that have different hives, and then you can go get lots of honey. I learned some of this in a book called The Natural History of the Bible by a very friendly Jewish person called Daniel Hillel, who is actually a scientist. But he reads the Bible with his environmental lens and was able to retrace through the different books of the Bible the natural history. Why do we talk about a land flowing with milk and honey, and when we visit Israel today, or even if we did in Jesus' time, it doesn't seem that bountiful. It doesn't seem to be producing that much as the description gives us. And what Mr. Hillel suggests in this book is that it did start off being, full of greenery, full of vegetation all around. But what happened is that when the Israelites came and the pastures, the sheep started eating it, well, sometimes in some conditions they would eat up to the root, and then those plants could not reproduce anymore. And so then the soil was bare and the sunlight would burn it off, and then with time would just slowly move into desert or very arid conditions. And this goes on for generations and generations, and then you get the prophets that are saying it's dry all around. They don't give a description of a land flowing with milk and honey anymore. It's a very dry land. Well, it's because of bad management and probably too much grazing from all those sheep. And so it's really interesting analysis, and I loved his book. It was a real eye-opener. Coming back to this generous description of the Promised Land when the Hebrews came into it, it says, "For the land your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with flowing streams, with springs and underground waters welling up in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land where you may eat bread without scarcity, where you will lack nothing, a land with stones, whose stones are iron, and from whose hills you may mine copper. You shall eat your fill and bless the Lord your God for the good land that he has given to you." Now, for those of us who do live in a land that there's lots of abundance, we should thank God for all that abundance. I live in Canada. Just like in the US, we have the tradition of one day in the month, in the fall, where we give thanks in similar fashion. And also, well, the fact that we give thanks also should bring us to take care of it, to make sure that it's bountiful, that it's abundant for future generations. Also, another thing, the fact that we refer to it as the Promised Land, Also, there's a sense of belonging to the land. And from hearing the First Nations here in Canada talk about their land, they talk about it in a very similar way. And this sense of belonging, because the Creator put all of this abundance for them to benefit from, and their responsibility to care for it. And the promised land is a good land. In Leviticus 26 we read, "If you follow my statutes and keep my commandments and observe them faithfully, I will give you your rains in their season, and the land shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing," we're referring to wheat here, "shall overtake the vintage," the grapes, "and the vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your bread to the full and live securely in your land." Wow. So if we respect and love God, it transforms us and we relate to the land in a very different way. Protect the fruit trees. Now, little warning here. It's a very disturbing passage I'm going to show you, but we'll take a moment to think about it and analyze it. This refers to Joshua when they come into the land and then start attacking a bunch of cities. Because it's a promised land, so it's there, so they're attacking a bunch of people and killing lots of people too. "If you besiege a town for a long time, making war against it in order to take it, you must not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. Although you may take food from them, you must not cut them down." So, very strange passage. That is a good up for ecology and really a down from a social justice point of view. War is never good, and in this case, just being so superior and wanting to take down some cities, kind of disgusting. But there's this idea that we have to protect fruit trees. Now, it is kind of interesting to have a quote from the Bible that defends fruit trees. And why not on your property, or school property or public property, or trying to put more fruit trees? A part of it will go to the birds, and a part of it will go to the humans who will go harvest them. Let me talk to you about Naboth's vineyard. It's in the Book of Kings, and it's King Ahab, who is very disappointing, let's just say. So King Ahab, we have his picture right there. He's looking just beyond the walls of his palace, and he wants to just make his palace bigger. And so he goes and sees Naboth, and he says, "Well, give me your vineyard." And initially, Ahab even offers Naboth to get more property somewhere else. Well, he'll obviously have to start anew and plant some more and start growing again, everything, but he does initially offer more land. But Naboth answers, "The Lord forbid that I should give you my ancestral inheritance." And then King Ahab is very disappointed, and he's moping, and his wife, Queen Jezebel, tells him, "Well, you shouldn't be intimidated by him. He's just a little squat. You're the king. You do whatever you want." And King Ahab has Naboth stoned to death and gets the property. What does it make me think about? Well, for me, this is totally a colonial mindset. The strongest settle wherever they want, and they impose their will. Here I am telling you this in English, living in Canada on traditional land that was taken from the natives, from the First Nations. And it's kind of hard to accept that. And here we have a great story in the Bible to start that conversation. We can pray together on this passage and ask for God to give us some wisdom to move towards reconciliation. And in Australia, there's Sorry Day, for example, to move towards reconciliation with the Aboriginals. And in many places across the world, there's this conflict with Indigenous peoples. And so they have a huge attachment to the land, usually more so than the settlers, the descendants of settlers. In this case, Naboth is not so much an owner as the steward, the caretaker of that land. He has a sense of belonging to the land of his ancestors. So it's not that the land belongs to him, is that he belongs to the land. And that's why he says, well, God forbid that I would sell the land of my ancestors. Give it to you.